All right, so today I'm going to share with you 3 books that will make you smarter than 99% of people. But let's talk real quick. What is it that I even mean when I say smarter? Maybe a better word to use here would be intelligence. Now, the way I think about intelligence is it is your entire pool of knowledge that you have available to you. All the data points, all the different tools in your toolbox that you could pull out and apply to different scenarios. Now, if we want to be as intelligent as possible, I believe the best way to do that is to go find the root pieces of information that have as much general applicability as possible. And so what I mean by that is that we need to be first principles thinkers. We need to go to the root of the matter. We need to understand the fundamentals of the universe or the fundamentals of how a thing operates. And from that, we can create a mental lattice work, a mental model that we can apply to all sorts of different areas. And so what I'm going to share with you today in these 3 books are 3 fundamental concepts, 3 root pieces of knowledge that I think will increase your overall intelligence pool. So let's start with the very first book, which is 6 Easy Pieces by Richard Feynman. So Richard Feynman was a acclaimed physicist. He's a great writer, very interesting character if you've ever read anything about his life. But 6 Easy Pieces is based off of the distillation of a lectures that he gave when he was teaching. I think it was at Berkeley or Cal. I'm not sure where he was teaching. But he gave, over the course of a year, these series of lectures. Now, if you can go get your hands on the Feynman lectures and read those, I would do that. I actually have a copy of that. It's a 6-binder set. It's reading textbooks. It's very, very deep, and it will expand your intelligence for sure. But this book, 6 Easy Pieces, takes the 6 most important lessons from that and just distills it so you can easily get it. You can see this book is like pretty quick and easy. So for the time that you invest in and the amount of information and leverage that you get out as a result of the fundamental knowledge you acquire around physics, which is everything. It's the underlying source code of the universe. It's the binary ones and zeros that runs everything. And so the more that you understand physics, the more you can extrapolate it out. Because what I found is that in life, the macro tends to resemble the micro. So the more that you understand of the little component parts that make up the whole, the more you understand the whole. And vice versa, that you can also invert that, right? And say the macro resembles the micro. So the more that we understand the universe, the more we can distill it down to our individual situations. I think this book, 6 Easy Pieces, is a great starting point and will definitely make you smarter than 99% of people who do not have any kind of understanding of physics at all. Now, the second book I want to talk about, if first book was around physics, the second book is around biology. This is called The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. This book is fantastic. It is a great way of understanding biology, the evolution of the gene. There's a lot of misunderstanding around the theory of evolution. A lot of people, they think they understand it, but then when you really start to dig in, you start to hear things in there where you go, that's not actually how the mechanisms play out. This book, The Selfish Gene, now this is a much bigger book than the first one, 6 Easy Pieces. This will give you a whirlwind ride through the biology of you and of the genetic ancestors that you had that got you to this moment, and why it is that we do what we do. It's very interesting that by understanding the underlying biology of you can also extrapolate that out to the behaviors of individuals at large. And this book right here, it's so well written. First of all, it's really good. I highly recommend it, not just for the entertaining stories that are in it, but for the valuable knowledge that you're going to acquire about the world, and maybe most importantly about yourself and why it is that you do certain things at a biological level that then impact you at a macro level. All right. Third book. And this one is from one of my favorite authors, actually. It's The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. Matt Ridley has written a number of really great books. Actually, case in point, if you want to read another great book on biology, he wrote a book called The Red Queen. Am I thinking about that right? The Red Queen, and he also wrote the Genome. Fantastic books that will give you a very fundamental starting point around biology. Highly recommend it. Now, The Rational Optimist is a little bit different. It's around the idea of how prosperity evolves, how it is that we are better off now than we were 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And how he paints a very compelling case that will continue to be the case moving forward. Now, there's a lot of, people that will get up on their soapbox and talk about climate change and nuclear proliferation and like we're losing our basic human rights and all this stuff. And they're saying like, oh, the world is worse now than it was before, or it's more dangerous now and it's going to be worse in the future. But he paints a very compelling argument in here to say, no, across the board, every single human on this planet is better off now than we were 500 years ago. And that's going to continue to improve even as we face existential crises, which we have always faced as humans. But he points out that our ability to problem solve is one of the unique distinctive factors of humanity. We've always been able to find a solution to the problems that we face. And so his idea is, this is a pretty crazy one, is that we don't lack resources. What we actually lack is an understanding of how to use what's around us in a resourceful manner. And so the way to think about this is things that we look at now and say that's a resource, we wouldn't have looked at that 1,000 years ago and said that's a resource, right? Petroleum. You would not have looked at this 2,000, 3,000 years ago as a caveman in a cave and thought that's a useful, beneficial resource. And yet now it is perhaps the most valuable resource on the planet, second maybe only to your attention, right? And so whether or not something is a resource is simply dependent on your level of sophistication and understanding of how to utilize that resource. And he paints a very compelling argument then that as we move forward in life, as a civilization, as humanity continues to progress, we will continue to discover new ways of using things that currently we don't consider to be resources, right? There's perhaps a world you can imagine in 10,000 years from now where our offspring, our progeny, the people that come after us, our great-great-grandchildren, they will have figured out a way to use the air around us as a resource to power their homes, right? So this book is very, very interesting. It will expand a lot of what you think and ways of thinking about the world. In case in point about this, by the way, one of my favorite functions of this book is I gave this book to one of my friends who is a socialist or was a socialist. This book completely changed his mind. He had been he's like 52 years old. He was a lifelong socialist. He read this book and he came around and realized, oh, actually, I think capitalism is the best system for managing and governing a civilization. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds of why exactly that is, but if you want to learn exactly what happened to change his mind, read this book. Seriously, it's amazing. So those are 3 books. The 6 Easy Pieces by Richard Feynman, The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, and The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. You read those and you will be, I promise, smarter than 99% of people.